So as you can see, we really love group projects over here.
Sorry. In the October of 1869, William Henry Dana purchased a small single-room apartment on the 3rd floor of a local apartment building. Over the next 150 years, this apartment building turned from what he called the Dana Musical Institute into an extension of a collegiate music program that educates hundreds of new musicians every year. My name is Maxwell Franco. This is Alyssa Kordecki, Brandon Hackemer, Taylor Natoli, Juan Rodriguez, and Brendan McAvoy. We are 6 members of the music composition studio at the Dana School of Music. We're excited to share with you a project that is about a year in the making. Where was that? In just a few short weeks, the Dana School of Music will be holding a gala and concert to celebrate the past 150 years of musical excellence. This concert will be featuring a performance of Sesquicentennial Suite, a piece of music composed and performed by students of the Dana School of Music.
During the spring semester of 2018, Dr. Stephen Gage, Director of Bands, approached the composition professor, Dr. David Morgan, in an effort to commission an original composition for the Dana Symphony Orchestra to rehearse and perform. Dr. Morgan recommended that some of his composition students take the commission as an opportunity to have some of their music performed. He then opened the idea up to his students and gave us all the option to collaborate on the combined piece. After getting an idea of who would be participating in the project, he sent each of us a list of famous works and composers to study for ideas and influences in our writing process.
After we had discussed the commission with Dr. Morgan, we treated this mostly as if we were just writing by ourselves. We started by composing short 2-minute excerpts for the orchestra, keeping in mind the strengths and weaknesses of each section of the orchestra. This was one unique advantage that we, as student composers, have. We have a connection with each individual performer and section in the ensemble, so we could compose for their strengths and weaknesses. We would meet with Dr. Morgan every week, and he would help us with different techniques for composing and new ideas to help us improve our excerpts.
So when I wrote my section for this piece, I was also playing with the YSU Wind Ensemble, and during the time that we had learned about the project, I was playing David Maslanka's 4th Symphony with the ensemble, and like listening back on the piece now, I hear that I have been highly influenced by that piece, and you can hear the influences when you listen to my section. You could also notice that I have a typical like singer-songwriter style that really shows through the melodies and harmonies that I utilize in the piece. So here is a small part of my section of the piece.
While writing my section of the piece, I was heavily influenced by the musical style of drum corps, which, if you don't know, is just a type of marching ensemble, like a marching band, except they don't use woodwinds like flutes or saxophones. Drum corps shows usually consist of a lot of hard, fast, rhythmic, and most importantly, loud music. So my section just kind of has a bunch of stuff from there. Hope I use
I am a jazz musician, so my writing style is mostly jazz influenced. However, that usually doesn't transfer well to a symphony orchestra. So I had to find some inspiration in the works of 20th century French composers, such as Maurice Ravel or Claude Debussy. I find their music to be just spectacular. Here's my section.
So my part of the piece was actually based on a period in Dana School of Music's history. Around the time of the Great Depression, it hit the Dana School of Music very hard, and it created a very financial recession within the Dana School of Music, where it dropped in numbers of students. And so mine features a big contrast between loud and soft. And in the software that we use to record this, there's some ridiculous sounding string, violin, glissandos, which is the word just for a slide. So feel free to laugh at those if they sound a little bit over the top.
My section is a reflection of music history. Starting in reverse, the back half is a late modernist, or a late romantic in the style of Webern or a little Wagner, a little early Schoenberg. The first half of the section is principally derived from the works of Olivier Messiaen and many of his modes of limited transposition.
And then my section, which we decided would be the finale of the piece. Maybe? Okay, there we go. So my section was primarily inspired by a piece that we performed last semester, like Alyssa's, but in the orchestra we performed Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. And in the first movement I was particularly taken away by I believe it's measure 439 in the first movement, where all the strings are they have this very slow, luscious melody, and then it just starts to slowly build with all the wind instruments in the background until it reaches this like thunderous conclusion. So here is an excerpt from Tchaikovsky. So like that moment in particular really resonated with me, and so I wanted our piece to have sort of that kind of finality and just enthusiasm to kind of finish it. So here's an excerpt from my section. So we all started off with our own separate influences, but one of the ways that we all develop our ideas is normally we like tinker around on the piano until we think of our melodies, and then we'll sketch them out on staff paper. So like that's an original draft of mine, and then this is a screenshot of our music notation software that most of us use. And that's usually our next step after the staff paper, is just putting it into a software and then playing it back and just kind of getting an original idea of how it sounds. And notation software is a really recent invention in the field of music composition, and it's really kind of revolutionized the way that composers write their music.
Music composition throughout the years has definitely changed. Today, we do not write the same way that composers even 100 years ago would have written music. The addition of digital composition software has really had a significant impact on the process of composition. How does playback, having digital playback affect the composer? How does the MIDI sounds, how are these MIDI sounds able to convey expressive emotions? The playback option softwares are great because you get to have the composition that you're writing rendered in real time, as opposed to having to wait for a performance of it after it has already been put onto paper in ink. Which is a phenomenal improvement. However, this can produce some difficulties. An over-reliance on this system can often lead to an underdeveloped ear, and the theoretical frameworks, the a priori knowledge of music theory, become lessened when you are purely relying on what you're hearing as opposed to being able to conceptualize it in your head. As far as expressivity goes, the playback can only do what the computer is programmed to do. So any kind of rubato, pushing and pulling of tempo, swells and dynamics, they have to be rigidly notated. Otherwise, they effectively don't exist. They don't happen. I have an example. I have an example here of the top being the first early drafts of part of my section, the bottom being the finalized edit. In order to get some of the tempo to stretch where I wanted it to, I added in some odd time signatures, which are just visually confusing for a musician to play. There's a lot of information going on when you're having to switch between time signatures every single measure. So in order to make it easier for the performer and to give the musical expressivity to the performer as opposed to embedding it within the composition, I edited the composition so that the individual performer can stretch the time and the composition is not locked into it. Yeah. Next.
So after each composer had taken the time to go through and make their individual section for the piece, the next step in the process was to compile them into one coherent piece of music. To do this, we had to sort of look at the mood that each piece created, sort of what was happening, if there was a lot of intense material happening at the time, if there was a lot of not as intense material. For Alyssa's section and Brendan's section, it became apparent that we would want to use those because of their high intensity material, as Brendan showed for the material he took from Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. It worked well with what we were trying to portray with this piece. In the end, creating it, we realized that we would need to either connect all of these pieces of music thematically with musical melodies that are similar throughout each piece, or present them as sort of individual separate parts in a larger context. We went with the second option and created a piece in the form of a suite. the suite form is the word meaning continuation or attached to. In the conventions of a suite in music, it would mean that each section of the piece is sort of its own section combined together. Is that
We have a couple minutes.
Okay. So each section, while being a part of a larger context, has its own individual melody that isn't shared throughout the piece. And then this sound wave at the bottom here is the audio frequency of the entire piece. You can see where some of the peaks and valleys are at with the volume. You can see there's more intensity over here, and at the end, rather in the middle, the higher volume moments are far and in between.
So once we finished writing the piece and putting all the individual parts together, we had to format each part for each instrument. We did that by looking through each instrument's part and fixing anything that may have went wrong in the process of putting the parts together, or just anything we might have messed up along the way. So up on the left, we have a part before adding any crescendos, dynamics, staccatos, or articulations, and then after is after we went through and fixed anything we might have left out. We weren't finished there though. Once we printed the parts out, we had to tape them together for each instrument because each part is multiple pages long.
So after we printed and taped all of the parts together, we had to hand it out to the orchestra and begin rehearsing. The sight reading went about as well as we'd expected, pretty good, but with definite room for improvement. So we rehearsed a little more as a full orchestra and continued to build upon our original ideas that we established with our sections. And then we decided that the orchestra should be separated so we can more fine-tune the music. The first sectional was Monday, by the way. We haven't gone into the full ensemble part just yet, that's next week. But we plan on going back to the full ensemble, and then obviously the performance is what's next. Now what's special about doing this at YSU is that we have a relatively medium-sized school, so it's small enough for everyone to collaborate with everyone, not just the people we see on a daily basis in our classes and in our respective ensembles.
So this orchestra project is just one of many things.
Can you wrap up and have questions?
Yes.
This orchestra project is one of many things that are going on here at YSU. The Dana League of Composers is growing right now. We're growing in ambition. We're striving to cultivate a culture of excellence and of artistic beauty. This kind of high art not being the only thing that we're working on, cross collaborations with all sorts of different artistic mediums. We have a lot of energetic and very talented composers here, and we're going to be getting some in the future, and we're really looking forward to making YSU a nice home for new music.